Have you ever felt your heart race and your throat tighten just before a big meeting? That moment when you know you need to explain something important, something technical, something that really matters, but the words just don't come out right. Maybe you're standing in front of your boss, or maybe you're on a video call with a client from another country, and suddenly your mind goes completely blank. You know the concept, you understand it deeply, but the moment you open your mouth, it comes out as a tangled mess of complicated words that nobody seems to understand. If that sounds familiar, I want you to take a deep breath right now, because today, this video is going to change everything for you.
That's right. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Lily. And today, we are diving into one of the most powerful communication skills you will ever learn. We're talking about how to explain complex, professional, and technical concepts using simple English words.
Now, before you think, oh, this is just about speaking slowly, or this is just about avoiding big words, I want to stop you right there. Because what we're going to share with you today goes so much deeper than that. This is about becoming the kind of communicator that people trust, that executives listen to, that international partners respect, and that teammates actually understand.
And here's the thing that might surprise you. The most brilliant people in the world, the scientists, the engineers, the tech leaders, the innovators, the ones who are truly at the top of their fields, they are not the ones using the most complicated language. They are the ones who can take the most complicated ideas and explain them in a way that a 10-year-old could understand.
And that skill, that ability, it is learnable. It is absolutely learnable. And that's exactly what we're going to teach you today.
So here's what we're going to cover. First, we're going to talk about the problem with what we call smart talk, that industry jargon and technical language that actually pushes people away instead of bringing them closer. Then, we're going to explore the power of high-frequency vocabulary, the simple, punchy, everyday words that actually stick in people's minds. After that, we're going to show you how to build relatable mental models, those brilliant little comparisons and analogies that make even the most complicated tech concepts feel completely natural. Then we're going to talk about strategic structure, how to organize what you say so people remember it and act on it. And finally, we're going to reveal what we call the global authority strategy, because speaking simply is actually your secret weapon for influencing leaders, executives, and international partners.
This is going to be a big lesson, a rich lesson, and we want you to stay with us all the way to the end, because the final strategy we share is honestly the one that ties everything together in the most powerful way. So get comfortable, grab a notebook if you have one, and let's get into it.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. And the beginning of this conversation has to start with a question. Have you ever sat in a meeting or listened to a presentation or read an email and thought, I have absolutely no idea what this person is trying to say?
I think every single person watching this right now has had that experience. And the funny thing is, the person doing the talking, they usually think they're doing a great job. They think the more technical and sophisticated their language sounds, the smarter they appear. The more impressed people will be, the more authority they will have.
And that is exactly the trap. That is exactly the problem we're talking about today. We call it smart talk, and smart talk is not actually smart at all. Smart talk is the habit of using complicated industry jargon, long technical words, and insider language as a way to sound impressive. But what it actually does is the complete opposite.
Let's start with a real example. Imagine you're in a meeting and someone from the tech team stands up and says this: "We need to leverage cross-functional synergies to optimize our digital transformation roadmap and drive stakeholder alignment across the organizational ecosystem."
Now, how many of you understood exactly what that meant?
Probably not many. And yet, sentences like that one are spoken in offices, boardrooms, and business meetings every single day all over the world. People say things like leverage synergies and optimize the ecosystem and drive stakeholder alignment, and they genuinely believe they are communicating something important.
But here's the truth. They're not communicating. They're performing. They're performing intelligence instead of actually sharing it. And there's a huge difference between those two things.
So let's talk about why this happens. Why do people fall into this trap of using complicated, jargon-filled language? There are actually a few really important reasons, and understanding them is the first step to breaking free from the habit.
The first reason is what we could call the imposter syndrome defense. A lot of people, especially in technical fields, feel deep down that they might not be as smart or as qualified as everyone thinks. And so they use complicated language as a kind of armor. If they use big words and technical terms, people won't question them. People will assume they know what they're talking about.
Does that sound familiar? It's more common than you might think. And honestly, it makes complete sense as a human reaction. When we feel insecure, we try to hide behind things that make us look impressive. For a lot of professionals, complicated language is that hiding place.
The second reason is what we could call industry immersion. When you spend years and years working in a specific field, whether it's software development, finance, medicine, engineering, or any other specialized area, you naturally start speaking the language of that field. The jargon becomes so normal to you that you actually forget it's jargon at all. You forget that the people sitting across from you might not share that same vocabulary.
And that's a really important point. The jargon doesn't feel like jargon to the person using it. It just feels like normal language. It feels like the accurate, precise way to describe what they're talking about. And so when they use it, they genuinely believe they're being clear. They don't realize they're actually creating confusion.
And the third reason, and this is a big one, is what we could call the complexity equals credibility myth. There is a deeply held cultural belief in many professional environments that complexity equals intelligence. That if something is easy to understand, it must be too simple. It must not be capturing the full depth and nuance of the topic. And so people feel pressure to make things sound complicated because simple explanations seem somehow less serious, less professional, less impressive.
Now, here's the moment where I want to introduce a very important idea from the world of psychology and cognitive science. It's called cognitive load theory, and understanding this theory is going to completely change the way you think about communication.
Cognitive load theory was developed by educational psychologist John Sweller, and it explains something fundamental about how the human brain works. Essentially, the idea is this. Our working memory, the part of our brain that processes new information in the moment, has a limited capacity. It can only handle so much information at one time.
Think of it like a table. A table can only hold so many things before things start falling off the edge. When you put too many things on the table at once, nothing can be properly organized. Things tip over. Things get lost. Nothing is stable.
The human brain works the same way. When someone is listening to you speak, their working memory is actively processing what you're saying. They're decoding your words, connecting them to things they already know, building meaning, and trying to follow the thread of your argument. All of that is happening simultaneously in real time.
And when you use complicated language, when you use jargon, technical terms, long multisyllabic words, complex sentence structures, you increase the cognitive load on your listener's brain. You make it work harder and harder just to keep up with the basic meaning of what you're saying.
And here is the critical thing that happens when cognitive load gets too high. The brain doesn't work harder. It shuts down. It disengages. It tunes out. The listener stops actually listening and starts just waiting for you to finish. They smile and nod, but they haven't absorbed a single word of what you said.
This happens in high-stakes meetings more than anywhere else, and the reason is really interesting. When we're in a high-pressure situation, when there are executives in the room, or when a big decision is on the line, our brains are already using a significant amount of cognitive energy just to manage the social dynamics, the emotions, the pressure of the situation. There's already less capacity available for processing new information.
So if you walk into that high-stakes meeting and start using complex language on top of an already cognitively burdened audience, you are setting yourself up to fail. Your message won't land. Your ideas won't be understood. Your expertise won't translate into action.
And that's heartbreaking, right? Because you might have genuinely brilliant ideas. You might have the exact solution that the team needs. But if you can't communicate it in a way that people can actually absorb, it's as if the idea never existed at all.
Now, let's talk about something that's happening right now in 2026 that makes all of this even more relevant than it's ever been before. And this is something that we find really exciting because it represents a massive shift in how professional communication is valued.
We're calling it the 2026 shift toward inclusive leadership. And what this means is that organizations all around the world, large corporations, technology companies, healthcare systems, global nonprofits, government institutions, are all actively moving away from valuing complexity in communication and toward valuing clarity.
Why? Because the workplace has changed dramatically. Today's professional environments are more diverse than ever before. Teams are made up of people from dozens of different countries, speaking dozens of different first languages. People are working remotely across different time zones. They're communicating primarily through text and video rather than face-to-face. And decisions are being made faster and under more pressure than at any other point in history.
In that kind of environment, clear, simple communication isn't just nice to have. It's a survival skill. It's a leadership necessity. And organizations are starting to recognize that the people who can communicate clearly, who can take complex information and make it accessible to everyone in the room, those are the people they want leading their teams.
In fact, some of the most prestigious companies in the world have started including communication clarity as part of their leadership competency frameworks. They're evaluating leaders not just on their technical expertise, but on their ability to translate that expertise into language that everyone can understand and act on.
And here's something that really captures this shift beautifully. In many of these organizations, clarity is now viewed as the ultimate sign of mastery, not complexity. Clarity. Because the thinking is this: if you truly understand something, you should be able to explain it simply. If you can only explain it using complicated language, maybe you don't understand it as deeply as you think.
This idea has actually been attributed to some of history's greatest minds. Albert Einstein was famous for saying that if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, developed an entire learning technique based on the principle of explaining complex ideas in simple language. The Feynman technique is now used by students and professionals all over the world to deepen their own understanding of difficult subjects.
So here's what we want you to take away from this first section. The problem with Smart Talk is not that the information is too complex. The problem is that complexity is being used as a substitute for clarity. And in the modern professional world, in a world that is becoming more diverse, more global, more fast-moving, and more inclusive, clarity is not just a nice quality to have. It is the defining quality of leadership.
Now, here's where things get really interesting, because knowing that you should speak simply and actually knowing how to do it are two completely different things, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into next.
In the next section, we're going to talk about the specific words and vocabulary choices that make the biggest difference. We're going to show you exactly how to swap out the complicated words for something simpler, more powerful, and more memorable. And you might be surprised by just how big a difference these small word changes can make.
Stay with us, because this next section is where the real transformation starts to happen.
All right, welcome to section 2. And I want to start this section with a question that might seem a little strange. What language do you think in when you're solving a problem?
That's a fascinating question, Bruce, because most people, when they think about this, realize that they don't think in jargon. They don't think in technical language. When you're trying to figure out a solution to a problem, when you're working something out in your head, you're using simple, everyday words. You're using the basic building blocks of language.
Exactly, and that tells us something really important. The clearest, most natural form of our thinking is actually simple. Our internal monologue uses straightforward language. And yet, the moment we try to communicate those thoughts to others, we dress them up in complicated, professional vocabulary. We take our simple, clear thoughts and we translate them into a language that's harder to understand.
Which makes absolutely no sense when you think about it. We're taking something clear and making it unclear. We're taking something direct and making it indirect. And we're doing this in the name of sounding professional.
So today, we're going to talk about the power of what linguists and communication experts call high-frequency vocabulary. And this is a concept that's going to completely change how you think about word choice.
High-frequency vocabulary refers to the words that appear most often in everyday English. These are the words that people use all the time, in every conversation, in every context. Words like use instead of utilize. Words like help instead of facilitate. Words like start instead of initiate. Words like show instead of demonstrate.
Now, notice something about the examples Lily just gave. In each pair, the first word, the simpler word, is actually the stronger word. It's shorter, it's more direct, it lands faster, it creates less cognitive load, and importantly, it's the word that everyone understands, regardless of their educational background, their professional field, or their first language.
Let's talk about why this is the case from a linguistic perspective, because it's genuinely fascinating. In English, there are two main sources of vocabulary. One is Germanic, and the other is Latinate, meaning words that came from Latin or French.
Germanic words are the old foundational words of the English language. Words like go, help, start, work, get, give, make, put, take, see, know, think, feel. These are short, punchy, concrete words. They describe actions and experiences directly. They've been part of the English language for over 1,000 years.
Latinate words, on the other hand, are words that entered English later, mostly through French after the Norman conquest of England in 1066, and through Latin during the Renaissance period, when scholars were translating ancient texts. Words like utilize, facilitate, demonstrate, initiate, implement, leverage, optimize, stakeholder, synergy.
Now, here's the interesting thing. In formal, professional, and academic writing, Latinate words became associated with education and sophistication. Using them became a signal that you were learned, that you were intelligent, that you belonged to a certain class of educated professional. And so, over the centuries, professional writing and speaking gradually shifted toward using more and more Latinate vocabulary.
But the research tells a very different story about what actually works in communication. Studies on reading comprehension and listening comprehension consistently show that texts and speeches using shorter, more common words are better understood, better remembered, and more persuasive than texts using longer, more complex words.
And this is not just about people who struggle with English. This is true for native speakers too. Everyone, regardless of their intelligence or educational level, processes simpler words faster and more accurately than complex words. It's just how the brain works.
So, what does this mean in practice? Let's do a real-world translation exercise, because I think this is where things get really concrete and really useful.
Let's take one of the most famous examples of corporate jargon and see what happens when we translate it into simple English. The phrase is, "We need to leverage our cross-functional synergies to optimize our value chain and drive stakeholder alignment."
Now, let's break that down word by word. Leverage means use. Cross-functional synergies means the benefits of teams working together. Optimize our value chain means make our work process better. Drive stakeholder alignment means get everyone to agree.
So the simple version of that sentence is, we need to use the benefits of our teams working together to make our process better and get everyone to agree.
But actually, we can make it even simpler and more direct than that. How about this? We need our teams to work together better so we can improve how we deliver value to our customers.
Notice what just happened. The meaning didn't change. All the important information is still there. But now it's clear. Now it's direct. Now anyone, whether they're a technical expert or a new employee or a client who's never worked in your industry, can understand exactly what you mean.
And here's something really important that we want you to notice. The simple version isn't just easier to understand. It's actually more powerful. It's more compelling. It's more actionable. Because when people understand what you're saying, they can respond to it. They can make decisions based on it. They can take action.
Let's do another example, because I really want this to sink in. Let's take a common phrase from the technology world. Someone might say, "We're going to implement a multi-layered cybersecurity infrastructure to mitigate potential vulnerabilities and ensure data integrity across our enterprise ecosystem."
Now, technically, that sentence is correct. It says what it means. But how many people in that meeting are going to walk away knowing exactly what needs to happen next?
Here's the simple version. We're going to build a strong security system to protect our data and prevent hackers from getting in.
Same information, completely clear, immediately understandable. Everyone in the room knows what the goal is, why it matters, and what success looks like.
Now, I can already hear some people thinking, but what about the technical details? What if I leave out something important by making it too simple?
Great question. And this is a really important distinction to make. Simplifying your language does not mean dumbing down your content. It does not mean leaving out important information. It means finding the clearest, most direct way to express that information so that everyone who needs to understand it actually does.
You can absolutely include technical details when they're necessary and relevant, but you frame those details in simple language. You introduce them with context. You give people the big picture first in words they understand, and then you layer in the specifics.
And here's something else that's really worth thinking about. In many cases, the technical details actually aren't necessary for the people you're talking to. If you're presenting to executives, they usually don't need the technical specifics. They need to understand the outcome, the cost, the timeline, and the risk. If you're talking to clients, they don't need to know exactly how the technology works. They need to know what it will do for them.
So part of simplifying your communication is also about choosing which information to include based on who you're talking to. This is what communication experts call audience analysis, and it's one of the most important skills you can develop as a professional communicator.
But let's stay focused on vocabulary for a moment, because there's more here that we want to share with you. We talked about swapping Latinate words for Germanic words. Now let's talk about something called the short word rule.
The short word rule is simple. When you have a choice between a short word and a long word that mean the same thing, always choose the short word. Always, without exception.
Now let's build a little vocabulary toolkit that you can start using right away. We're going to give you some of the most common complex words used in professional communication, and we're going to give you their simple alternatives.
Instead of use, say use. Instead of facilitate, say help or make easier. Instead of demonstrate, say show. Instead of initiate, say start. Instead of terminate, say end. Instead of comprehend, say understand. Instead of acquire, say get. Instead of implement, say put in place or just do. Instead of endeavor, say try. Instead of communicate, say talk or tell or share.
And for those longer, more complex phrases, instead of at this point in time, say now. Instead of in the event that, say if. Instead of due to the fact that, say because. Instead of in order to, say to. Instead of with regard to, say about. Instead of for the purpose of, say to or for.
Do you see a pattern here? In every single case, the simpler alternative is not just easier to understand, it's also shorter. And shorter means faster. When you use simple language, you can actually communicate more information in less time because your listeners don't need to spend time decoding what you're saying.
Now, let's talk about something that becomes especially important in diverse, globalized professional environments. And this is the issue of being misunderstood.
We live and work in a world where English is used as a shared language between people who come from wildly different linguistic backgrounds. The person in your meeting might be from Japan or Brazil or Germany or Nigeria or India. They speak English, but English is not their first language. And the vocabulary they've learned in English, the vocabulary they're most comfortable with, is exactly the high-frequency vocabulary we've been talking about.
When you use jargon, when you use complex, field-specific language, you create an instant barrier with anyone whose English is not completely fluent. You create a situation where they might understand individual words but not the overall meaning, or they might not understand specific words at all and be too embarrassed to ask. Or they might think they understand when they actually don't, which is the most dangerous scenario of all.
And this isn't just about non-native English speakers. Think about cross-functional meetings, where people from different departments come together. A software engineer and a marketing manager might both speak fluent English, but they speak completely different professional dialects. The technical terms that are completely obvious to the engineer are completely foreign to the marketing manager, and vice versa.
So using simple, high-frequency vocabulary doesn't just make you easier to understand by people with different English proficiency levels. It makes you easier to understand across departments, across industries, across professional backgrounds. It makes you a genuinely universal communicator.
And in a world where the most impactful work is increasingly done by diverse, cross-functional, international teams, being a universal communicator is an incredibly powerful skill.
Now, here's a thought experiment I want you to try. Think about the last email you sent at work, or the last presentation you gave, or the last report you wrote. If you had to score yourself on the simplicity of your language, how would you do? Were you using short, simple, punchy words, or were you reaching for the impressive-sounding Latinate alternatives?
Most of us, if we're honest, fall into the complexity trap more often than we'd like to admit. It's a deeply ingrained habit, and breaking a habit takes practice and intention.
But here's the good news. It's actually one of the most enjoyable habits to break. Because when you start experimenting with simpler language, you start to experience directly how much more effectively people respond to you, how much more engaged they are, how much more engaged they are, how much more quickly decisions get made, how much more clearly your ideas come across.
And that positive feedback makes the habit change feel worth it. It makes simplicity feel like a reward rather than a sacrifice.
So we want to give you a small challenge to try this week. Take one piece of written communication that you need to produce, whether it's an email, a report summary, or a presentation slide, and before you send it or present it, go through it word by word. Every time you find a long, complex, jargon-filled word or phrase, replace it with the simplest, most direct alternative you can think of.
And then notice how it reads. Notice whether the meaning is still there. Notice whether it actually communicates more clearly. We are willing to bet that in almost every case, the simple version is going to be noticeably better.
All right. We've talked about the problem with complex language. We've explored the power of simple vocabulary, but there's a dimension of communication that goes even deeper than individual word choices, and that's what we're going to explore in our next section.
Because sometimes, even when you're using simple words, the concept you're trying to explain is still too abstract, too unfamiliar, too far outside your listener's experience for them to really get it. And that's where mental models come in.
Stay with us, because this next section is honestly one of our favorites, and it contains a technique that some of the world's greatest communicators, teachers, scientists, and leaders use every single day to make the impossible seem simple.
All right, let's start this section with a story. In 2015, a man named Randall Munroe published a book called Thing Explainer. Randall Munroe is the creator of a very popular webcomic called XKCD, and he's also a former NASA robotics engineer, so he knows a thing or two about complex technical concepts.
In Thing Explainer, Randall Munroe did something remarkable. He explained some of the most complex scientific and technical concepts in the world, including how nuclear reactors work, how space rockets work, how the human body works, and how computers work, using only the 1,000 most common words in the English language.
And the result is absolutely brilliant. Because when you force yourself to explain something using only the most basic, everyday vocabulary, something magical happens. You have to find the core truth of the concept. You have to cut away everything that isn't essential. And what's left is usually the clearest, most powerful explanation you've ever come across.
For example, instead of nuclear reactor, Munroe called it a heavy metal power building in his book. Instead of the International Space Station, he called it the place in the sky where people live. Instead of the periodic table of elements, he called it the pieces everything is made of.
Now, are those descriptions perfectly technically accurate? No, not in a scientific sense. A nuclear reactor is more complex than a heavy metal power building, but do those descriptions immediately give a non-expert listener a clear, intuitive sense of what the thing is and what it does? Absolutely, yes.
And that is the heart of what we call building relatable mental models. A mental model is the picture that forms in your listener's mind when they're trying to understand something new. When you're explaining a concept to someone, you're not just transferring information from your brain to theirs. You're helping them build a picture, a structure, a framework in their mind that they can use to hold and make sense of that new information.
And the most powerful tool we have for building those mental models quickly and effectively is the analogy, the comparison, the "it's like" statement.
When you say, "it's like," you're doing something incredibly powerful. You're connecting a new, unfamiliar concept to something your listener already knows and understands. You're essentially borrowing the mental model they already have for one thing and using it as a scaffold to build understanding of something new.
Think about how often really great communicators use analogies. Think about how teachers explain new concepts. Think about how scientists describe discoveries to the general public. Think about how the best CEOs explain their company's strategy. Almost always, you'll find that they're using analogies, comparisons, and "it's like" statements to make the unfamiliar feel familiar.
Now, let's get into the actual technique. How do you choose a good analogy? How do you find the right comparison for a complex technical concept?
The key is to choose analogies based on universal human experiences. These are things that virtually everyone has done, seen, or felt, regardless of their profession, their education level, their cultural background, or their age. And we can organize these universal experiences into a few broad categories.
The first category is cooking and food. Almost every human being on the planet has some experience with cooking or at least with eating. The processes, tools, and experiences of the kitchen, mixing ingredients, following a recipe, things taking time to prepare, things needing the right temperature, things going wrong when the proportions are off, these are universally relatable.
For example, how would you explain machine learning, which is one of the core technologies behind artificial intelligence, to a non-technical audience? You could say, machine learning is like teaching a child to recognize animals by showing them lots of pictures. The first time you show a child a picture of a dog, they don't know what a dog is. But as you show them more and more pictures of dogs and tell them each time, this is a dog, they start to recognize the pattern. They start to see what makes a dog a dog. And eventually, even when you show them a picture of a dog they've never seen before, they can identify it correctly. Machine learning works exactly the same way. We show the computer thousands or millions of examples, and it learns to recognize patterns. And then it can apply those patterns to new situations it's never encountered before.
That analogy doesn't require any technical knowledge at all. It doesn't require you to know what an algorithm is, or what training data means, or what a neural network does. But it gives you an immediate, intuitive sense of the core principle behind machine learning.
The second category of universal experiences is travel and navigation. Most people have had the experience of following directions to get somewhere, getting lost, using a map, or figuring out the best route to a destination.
For example, how would you explain blockchain technology? Blockchain is something that many people have heard of, but very few actually understand. You might say, imagine you're on a road trip with 10 of your friends, and every time you stop to buy gas or food, everyone in the group writes down what was bought and what it cost in their own personal notebook. Now, if one person tries to change their notebook later and claim that something different happened, the other 9 notebooks all still have the correct record. So any single person's attempt to cheat or alter the record is immediately obvious. Blockchain works like those 10 notebooks. It's a record of transactions that is shared across thousands of computers at once, so that no single person can change it without everyone else knowing.
Perfect. You've just explained one of the most complex technological innovations of the last decade, using an analogy that anyone who's ever traveled with a group of friends can immediately understand.
The third category of universal experiences is home building and construction. The ideas of building something from the ground up, laying foundations, adding layers, using the right tools for the right job, these resonate with almost everyone.
And this category is particularly useful for explaining systems architecture, software development processes, and organizational structures. For example, explaining why a software project can't be rushed, you might say, you can't build a skyscraper without first laying a strong foundation. If you rush the foundation, the whole building becomes unstable. And you can't fix the foundation once you've already built the 10th floor. Software development works the same way. We need to build the right technical foundation first, because going back and fixing it later is 10 times more expensive and 10 times harder than getting it right at the beginning.
The fourth category is the human body and health. We all live in bodies. We all have some personal experience with health, illness, injury, and recovery. And the body is an incredibly rich source of analogies.
For example, how would you explain cybersecurity, specifically the concept of defense in depth, to a non-technical audience? You might say, think about how your body protects itself from disease. Your first line of defense is your skin, which keeps most things out. But if something gets through your skin, you have your immune system to fight it off. And if the infection is severe, you have medical treatment as a backup. Cybersecurity works the same way. We don't just rely on one protection. We have firewalls to keep threats out, then detection systems to catch anything that gets through, then response teams to deal with actual breaches. It's layers of protection, just like your body.
Beautiful. Immediately understandable. No technical knowledge required.
Now, let's talk about something really important when it comes to choosing analogies, and this might go against your instinct as a technical expert. The best analogy is not necessarily the most technically accurate one. The best analogy is the one that gives the clearest, intuitive sense of the core concept to your specific audience.
What we mean by this is a good enough metaphor that genuinely helps your listener understand the essence of what you're explaining is infinitely more valuable than a perfectly accurate but confusing description.
Think about it this way. If someone asks you how a car engine works and they've never seen one before, the most helpful thing you can do is give them a simple explanation, maybe comparing it to a pump or to your legs pedaling a bicycle, something that gives them the general idea. Even if that explanation glosses over some of the more complex.
A perfectly accurate but completely impenetrable explanation is not more helpful. It's less helpful because it leaves the person no better informed than they were before you started talking.
And for decision-making purposes, a clear, good enough understanding is almost always sufficient. If an executive needs to decide whether to invest in a new AI system, they don't need to understand backpropagation and gradient descent. They need to understand what the system will do, how confident we are that it will work, what the risks are, and what the cost is. A good analogy can give them exactly that level of understanding without requiring them to become AI researchers.
Let's do a few more examples because I really want you to get comfortable with this technique. Let's tackle quantum computing, which is probably one of the most conceptually difficult technologies to explain simply.
Traditional computers work with bits. A bit is like a light switch. It's either on or off. It's either 0 or 1. And everything a computer does, every calculation, every piece of data, every movie you watch, every email you send, is ultimately made up of billions of those on-off switches.
A quantum computer uses something called qubits. And the strange thing about a qubit is that because of the laws of quantum physics, a qubit can be both on and off at the same time. This is called superposition, and it means that a quantum computer can explore many possible solutions to a problem simultaneously, rather than trying them one at a time the way a traditional computer does.
Now, if you're a quantum physicist, that explanation might be satisfying, but for most people, it's still quite abstract. So let's use an analogy.
Imagine you're in a giant maze, and you need to find your way to the exit. A traditional computer is like one person walking through the maze, trying one path, hitting a dead end, going back, trying another path, going back, trying another until eventually they find the right way out. A quantum computer is like having thousands of people enter the maze at the same time, all exploring different paths simultaneously. The quantum computer finds the exit dramatically faster, not because it's smarter, but because it's exploring many possibilities at the same time.
That analogy isn't a perfect description of quantum computing. It glosses over a lot, but it gives any listener an immediate, intuitive sense of why quantum computers are potentially so much more powerful than traditional computers for certain types of problems. And that understanding is genuinely useful for decision makers who need to evaluate whether quantum computing is relevant to their business.
Now, here's something we want you to practice. We want you to try this technique with something in your own field. Take one complex concept from your area of expertise, something that you know well but that other people often find confusing, and try to explain it using an analogy from one of those universal experience categories we talked about: cooking, travel, home building, or the human body.
Don't worry about making the analogy perfect. Remember what we said earlier. A good enough analogy that creates genuine understanding is far more valuable than a perfect but confusing explanation.
Try it right now, actually. Pause the video for a moment. Think of one concept from your work and think of how you might explain it using a simple, universal comparison. And if you come up with a great one, we would absolutely love it if you share it in the comments below.
Because here's one of the most beautiful things about this technique. When you practice creating analogies, you're not just improving your communication skills, you're actually deepening your own understanding of the concepts you're explaining. The process of finding the right analogy forces you to identify the essential core of an idea. It forces you to understand it so well that you can translate it into the simplest possible terms.
This is exactly what the Feynman technique, which we mentioned earlier, is all about. Richard Feynman, the brilliant physicist, would study a concept until he understood it so thoroughly that he could explain it to a child. And he found that this process of simplification actually revealed gaps in his own understanding, places where he thought he knew something but actually didn't understand it as well as he thought.
So, building relatable mental models through analogy isn't just a communication technique, it's a thinking technique, it's a learning technique. It makes you not just a better communicator, but a deeper and more genuine expert.
All right. Now that we've got our vocabulary toolkit and our mental model framework, it's time to talk about structure. Because you can have the perfect words and the perfect analogies, but if your message isn't organized effectively, it still won't land the way you want it to.
In the next section, we're going to talk about how to structure your communication for maximum retention and impact. And we're going to introduce some really specific, practical frameworks that you can start using immediately in your presentations, your emails, and your conversations.
Before we get there, though, I just want to take a quick moment to say, if you're finding this lesson helpful, if you're getting value from what Bruce and I are sharing today, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We create content like this regularly to help you build your English communication skills in a practical, real-world way. And your support through likes and subscriptions really does help us reach more learners who need this content. So thank you so much. Now, let's keep going.
All right, section 4. And we're going to start with a very bold claim. It doesn't matter how simple your words are. It doesn't matter how brilliant your analogies are. If you structure your message incorrectly, people will not remember it.
Structure is everything. Structure is the container that holds all your brilliant words and ideas and makes them coherent. And most people, even very skilled communicators, make fundamental mistakes with structure that undermine everything else they're trying to do.
So let's talk about what effective structure actually looks like for professional technical communication. And we're going to start with what communication experts call the inverted pyramid.
Now, the inverted pyramid is a structure that was originally developed for journalism. Journalists figured out a very long time ago that readers don't always read the whole story. Sometimes they only read the first paragraph. Sometimes they only read the headline. And so good journalistic writing puts the most important information first. The who, what, where, when, why, all of that goes right at the top. The details and background come afterward.
And in professional and technical communication, the inverted pyramid works exactly the same way, but we apply it slightly differently. In technical communication, the inverted pyramid means this: lead with the outcome, not the process.
Most technical people do the exact opposite. They lead with the process. They explain everything they did, all the steps they took, all the technical details of how they got there. And then, at the very end, they reveal the conclusion, the outcome, the answer.
And the problem with that structure is that by the time you get to the conclusion, half your audience has already mentally checked out. They've been sitting through the process without knowing where it's going or why it matters. And that is frustrating and disengaging.
Whereas, if you lead with the outcome, you immediately give your audience a reason to pay attention. You tell them what matters and why. And then when you explain the process, the how and the why become the supporting evidence for the conclusion you've already stated.
Let's make this concrete with an example. Imagine you're a data scientist presenting the results of a 6-month analysis to your company's leadership team. Here are 2 ways you could structure your opening.
Over the past 6 months, our team collected data from 47 different sources, including our CRM, our website analytics, our customer service logs, and our transaction database. We processed approximately 2.3 terabytes of raw data and applied a combination of supervised machine learning models and unsupervised clustering algorithms. After extensive testing and validation, we achieved a model accuracy of 87.3% on our holdout set.
Now, at this point in the presentation, do the executives in the room know why this matters? Do they know what decision they're supposed to make based on this information? No, they're still waiting, and they're already starting to lose interest.
Version 2, the inverted pyramid approach. We now know which of our customers are most likely to leave us in the next 90 days. This insight gives us the opportunity to retain roughly $4 million in annual revenue by targeting these customers with specific offers. Here's how we found this, and here's exactly what we recommend doing with it.
Same information, completely different impact. In the second version, the executives know immediately what matters, what the business implication is, and what comes next. They have a reason to engage with everything that follows.
This principle applies not just to presentations. It applies to emails. It applies to reports. It applies to conversations. Whenever you're about to communicate something complex, ask yourself, what is the most important outcome here? What does my audience need to know and do? And lead with that.
Now, there's a very natural human fear that comes up when people think about leading with the conclusion. And that fear is, what if people disagree with my conclusion? What if I say the conclusion and then I haven't had a chance to build the case yet?
That's a really valid concern. But here's the thing. If your conclusion is sound, having people hear it before the supporting evidence actually makes them more receptive to the evidence, not less. Because now they know what the evidence is for. They know what story the evidence is telling. They can follow the logic more easily.
And if your conclusion is wrong or incomplete, isn't it better to find that out immediately? If you lead with the conclusion and an executive immediately says, wait, I don't think that's right because that's not a failure, that's a conversation, that's progress. That's much better than spending 45 minutes walking through your methodology only to have someone object at the very end.
All right. So the first structural principle is the inverted pyramid. Lead with the outcome. Now let's talk about the second structural principle, which is sentence structure and voice.
If you've ever studied English, you've probably heard about active voice and passive voice, and you might know that most teachers tell you to use active voice. But do you know why? And do you know how dramatically it affects your communication?
Let's start with the basics. Active voice is when the subject of the sentence performs the action. The team completed the project. The engineer fixed the bug. The CEO made the decision. In each of these sentences, we know immediately who did what. The action is clear. The responsibility is clear. The meaning is direct.
Passive voice is when the subject of the sentence receives the action, or when the action happens without a clear subject. The project was completed. The bug was fixed. The decision was made. Notice what's different. We don't know who completed the project. We don't know who fixed the bug. We don't know who made the decision. The sentences are vaguer. They're less direct.
In technical and professional writing, passive voice is incredibly common, and there are a few reasons for that. Sometimes it's genuinely appropriate when you truly don't know who performed an action or when the actor is irrelevant. But most of the time, passive voice creeps into professional communication for a less noble reason.
It creeps in because it allows people to sound authoritative while avoiding personal responsibility. The decision was made to reduce headcount sounds much less personal and much less accountable than we decided to lay off 200 people. Errors were identified in the process sounds much less direct than our team made mistakes in the process.
And while that vagueness might sometimes seem politically safer, it actually undermines your authority rather than strengthening it. Because people can sense when language is evasive, they can feel when someone is hiding behind passive construction, and it erodes trust.
Using active voice, on the other hand, projects confidence. It projects clarity, it projects ownership, and it's dramatically easier to understand because the listener never has to wonder who is doing what.
Let's look at the difference in a real professional context. Passive version. It has been determined that additional resources will need to be allocated to the project in order for the deadline to be met. Active version. We need 2 more engineers to meet this deadline.
The active version is shorter, clearer, more direct, and more honest. It's also more actionable. We need 2 more engineers to meet this deadline. Tell someone exactly what needs to happen. The passive version? By the time you finish decoding it, you've lost track of the request.
And here's a quick trick for identifying passive voice in your own writing. If you can add "by zombies" to the end of the sentence and it still makes grammatical sense, it's probably passive voice. The decision was made by zombies. Yes, that's passive. The team made the decision by zombies. That doesn't work, which tells you it's active voice.
I love that test. That's one of my all-time favorite grammar tips.
Okay, let's also talk about sentence length, because sentence length has an enormous impact on how easy or hard it is to understand what you're saying. And there is a clear, research-backed guideline here. Shorter sentences are almost always better.
Research on reading and listening comprehension shows that the ideal sentence length for business communication is between 15 and 20 words. When sentences get longer than that, comprehension starts to drop. When sentences get longer than 35 or 40 words, comprehension drops significantly.
And this isn't just about reading. This is especially important for spoken communication, because when we're listening rather than reading, we can't go back and reread something we didn't understand. We can't slow down the pace. We have to keep up in real time. And long, complex sentences are much harder to follow in real time than short, clear ones.
Here's a practical rule. If you find yourself writing a sentence with more than 2 or 3 clauses, break it up. Make it into 2 or 3 separate sentences. Every sentence should contain one main idea. When you try to cram multiple ideas into one sentence connected by and, but, which, although, however, therefore, you're increasing the cognitive load dramatically.
Now let's talk about the third structural principle for technical communication. And this is specifically relevant for presentations. It's what we call the one concept per slide rule.
If you've ever sat through a presentation where the presenter has put 12 bullet points, 3 charts, 2 diagrams, and a paragraph of small text, all on a single slide, you know exactly how overwhelming and ineffective that approach is. The presenter ends up saying, "I know you can't read this, but," which is one of the most unfortunately common phrases in business presentations, and which we would very much like to see eliminated from every presentation everywhere.
The one concept per slide rule is exactly what it sounds like. Each slide should contain exactly one main idea. Not 2 ideas, not 3. 1.
And that one idea should be expressed as a clear, short headline at the top of the slide. Not a topic label like Q3 revenue. A complete thought, a statement that communicates the core message, like Q3 revenue exceeded targets by 18%.
The difference between a topic label and a message headline is significant. A topic label tells the audience what the slide is about. A message headline tells the audience what they need to know from the slide. The second approach is dramatically more effective for decision-making and retention.
And the visual elements on the slide, any charts, graphs, images, or diagrams, should directly support and illustrate that single message. If a visual element doesn't directly support the headline, it shouldn't be on that slide. It's a distraction.
This approach, using clear message headlines and one concept per slide, is often called the assertion evidence structure, and research on presentation effectiveness consistently shows that this structure produces better comprehension, better retention, and better action from audiences than the traditional bullet point approach.
Now, one objection that always comes up when we talk about this is, but if I only put one concept per slide, my presentation will be too long. I'll have too many slides.
And the honest answer is, if your presentation has 25 complex concepts, then yes, you'll have 25 slides. But here's the question you should be asking yourself. Does your presentation actually need to cover 25 complex concepts? Or have you been trying to cover too much, which is why people leave your presentations feeling overwhelmed and confused?
In most cases, when people start applying the one concept per slide rule, they discover that they've been trying to communicate far more information than their audience actually needs. And the discipline of simplifying to one concept per slide forces them to make choices about what's truly essential, and those choices make their overall message sharper, clearer, and more impactful.
Let's bring all three of these structural principles together with a quick summary. Principle 1. Use the inverted pyramid. Lead with the outcome, not the process. Tell people what matters before you tell them how you got there. Principle 2. Use active voice and short sentences. Say who does what directly and clearly. Keep each sentence to one main idea. Principle 3. Apply the one concept per slide rule. Each slide gets one message expressed as a complete statement at the top of the slide.
These three principles work together to create communication that is not just easier to understand, but genuinely easier to act on. And in professional communication, enabling action is always the ultimate goal.
All right, we've covered the problem, the vocabulary, the analogies, and the structure. Now it's time for our final section, and this is where we pull everything together into what we call the global authority strategy.
This section is about influence. It's about leadership. It's about how the combination of everything we've discussed today translates into a real competitive professional advantage. And it ends with a practical tool that you can use immediately to audit your own communication.
But before we get there, I want to check in with you. How are you feeling about everything we've covered so far? Are you seeing how these pieces connect? Are you starting to think about how you'd apply these ideas in your own professional life?
Because that's really what matters. This isn't just theory. Every single thing we've talked about today is immediately applicable, and the final section is going to make that even more concrete.
Let's keep going. All right, everyone, we've arrived at our final section, and I want to start it with a question that I think is going to reframe everything we've talked about today.
What do you think is the difference between a technical expert and a visionary leader?
If you've been paying attention throughout this video, you probably already have a sense of the answer, because we've been circling around it the whole time.
A technical expert knows things deeply, thoroughly, precisely. They have mastered the complexity of their field. They speak the language of their domain fluently. They know the details that others don't.
A visionary leader can do all of that, but they can also translate it. They can take what they know and make it accessible to everyone who needs to understand it. They can bridge the gap between the technical world and the human world. And in doing so, they can inspire action, build trust, align teams, and drive change in a way that technical expertise alone never can.
And here is the key insight that we want to leave you with today. In the modern professional world, it is not enough to be right. You have to be understood. Because ideas that can't be communicated clearly, plans that can't be explained in terms people grasp, visions that can't be shared in language that resonates, they stay trapped in the mind of the person who has them. They never become real. They never create change.
Simple, clear communication is not just a nice skill to have. It is the mechanism through which your expertise creates impact. It is the bridge between knowing something and doing something about it.
And this is especially true when it comes to influencing non-technical executives and international partners, which is what we're going to focus on in this final section.
Let's start with non-technical executives. This is a group that most technical professionals find incredibly challenging to communicate with, and the frustration often goes both ways. Technical people feel like executives don't appreciate the depth and complexity of what they're dealing with, and executives feel like technical people don't understand the business realities and constraints that drive decisions.
And both sides are often right. But here's the thing. As the person bringing the technical expertise to the table, the responsibility for bridging that gap falls primarily on you, because you are the one who understands both worlds, at least to some degree. You understand the technical reality, and you can learn to speak the language of business outcomes.
What executives care about is not how something works. They care about what it does, what it costs, what the risk is, and how long it will take. Those are the 4 fundamental dimensions of almost every business decision. And if you can frame your technical communication in those 4 dimensions, you will immediately become dramatically more effective with executive audiences.
Let's use a concrete example. Imagine you're a cybersecurity engineer, and you need to get budget approval for a new security system. The technical approach would be to explain the architecture, the specific threats it addresses, the technical capabilities of the system, the integration requirements, and the implementation process.
The executive approach would be to say, "We have a security gap right now that puts us at risk of a data breach. Based on industry data, a breach of our size could cost between $5 and $15 million in fines, remediation, and lost customer trust. The solution I'm recommending costs $800,000 and will close this gap within 3 months. The risk of not doing this significantly outweighs the cost of doing it."
Notice what's different. The executive version doesn't explain how the security system works at all. It speaks entirely in the language of business risk and financial impact. It answers the 4 key questions. What does it do? It closes a security gap. What does it cost? $800,000. What is the risk? A potential $5 to $15 million loss. And how long will it take? 3 months.
That's it. That's the message. Everything else is supporting detail that can be provided if asked for. But the core communication is crystal clear, immediately actionable, and directly relevant to what the executive needs to know.
Now let's talk about international partners. This is a different communication challenge, but equally important. When you're working with people from different countries and different cultural backgrounds, communication is already more complex than in a single culture environment. There are different norms around directness, different expectations about formality, different relationship building practices, and of course, different levels of English proficiency.
Using simple, clear English dramatically reduces the communication challenges in multicultural settings. When you use jargon, idioms, complex sentence structures, and culturally specific references, you create multiple layers of potential misunderstanding. When you use simple, standard English, you eliminate most of those layers.
And there's something else that happens when you speak simply in international settings. People from other countries who are speaking English as a second or third language are often working incredibly hard just to follow the conversation. When you use simple language, you're showing respect for their effort. You're making it easier for them to contribute their own ideas and expertise. and that generosity is noticed and appreciated.
In fact, we found that one of the fastest ways to build trust with international partners is to deliberately slow down, use simpler language, and check for understanding regularly. It signals that you're more interested in genuine communication than in impressing people with your vocabulary.
There's a concept in international business communication called global English, or plain English for global audiences, and it involves several specific practices that we want to share with you. First, avoid idioms. Idioms are phrases where the meaning is different from the literal words, like hit the ground running, or let's touch base, or think outside the box. These phrases are completely opaque to someone who learned English as a second language. Replace idioms with literal, direct language.
Second, avoid cultural references. References to specific sports, television shows, historical events, or cultural practices that are specific to one country or region can confuse or exclude listeners from other cultures. Use universal references, or better yet, use the analogy approach we discussed in Section 3, drawing on universal human experiences.
Third, use short sentences. We talked about this in the structure section, but it's even more important in multicultural settings. Long, complex sentences with multiple clauses are much harder to follow for non-native speakers.
Fourth, speak at a moderate pace. In international settings, speaking too fast is one of the most common barriers to effective communication. A slightly slower, clearer pace gives non-native speakers time to process what you've said before you move on.
Fifth, check for understanding regularly. Not by asking, does everyone understand, because people will usually just nod and say yes, even if they don't. Instead, ask specific questions that require a response. What questions do you have about this? Or can someone summarize what we've agreed on so far? Or what concerns do you see with this approach?
These 5 practices, avoid idioms, avoid cultural references, use short sentences, speak at a moderate pace, and check for understanding, are the foundation of effective communication in global professional settings. And they all come back to the same principle we've been building all the way through this video. Clarity is the ultimate sign of mastery.
Now, let's get really practical. We want to give you a concrete, actionable tool that you can use immediately. We're calling it the Complexity Audit Checklist, and it's a series of questions you can ask yourself every time you write an email, prepare a presentation, or get ready for an important meeting.
Here is the Complexity Audit Checklist.
Question 1. Have I led with the outcome? Does my message start with the most important result, implication, or decision that my audience needs to know? Or am I building up to it at the end?
Question 2. Have I used active voice? Is it clear who is doing what in my communication? Or have I hidden the actor behind passive constructions?
Question 3. Are my sentences short enough? Does every sentence contain just one main idea? Are there any sentences that could be broken into 2 simpler sentences?
Question 4. Have I eliminated unnecessary jargon? Is every technical term I'm using truly necessary for this specific audience? Could any of them be replaced with simpler, more common words without losing important meaning?
Question 5. Have I defined the terms that remain? For any technical terms I do need to use, have I defined them in simple language the first time I use them?
Question 6. Have I used analogies and examples? For the most complex or unfamiliar concepts, have I included at least one concrete analogy or real-life example that connects the concept to something my audience already understands?
Question 7. Is my structure inverted pyramid? Does my most important point come first, with supporting details following?
Question 8. If it's a presentation, does each slide have one clear message headline? And does everything else on the slide directly support that headline?
Question 9. Have I considered my audience? Is this communication appropriate for the specific people who will receive it? Have I matched the level of technical detail to their background and their needs?
And question 10. Could a thoughtful, intelligent person with no technical background understand this? If you imagine sharing this communication with someone who is smart and engaged but has no knowledge of your specific field, would they be able to follow the core message?
That last question is a really powerful one because it forces you to think about your communication from the outside in, from the reader's or listener's perspective rather than from your own. And that outside-in perspective is what separates average communicators from truly exceptional ones.
Now, we know that running through a 10-point checklist on every email might sound a bit intense, and we're not suggesting you do that for every casual message. But for your important communications, the presentations to leadership, the reports that will drive decisions, the emails that set the direction for a project, these are worth the investment of a careful review.
And over time, as you practice these principles consistently, you'll find that they become intuitive. They'll become part of how you naturally think and speak. And that's when the real transformation happens. That's when you stop being someone who occasionally communicates clearly and become someone who is known as a clear communicator, someone whose communication others model and aspire to.
And that reputation, being known as someone who can explain anything clearly, who can bridge the technical and the human, who can make the complex accessible, that is an incredibly powerful professional asset in every field, in every industry, in every level of leadership. That ability is valued and rewarded.
Let's bring in one more really important dimension of the global authority strategy, which is what we're calling the transformation from technical expert to visionary leader.
This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it follows a fairly predictable path, and we want to walk you through what it looks like.
Stage 1 is what we could call the expert stage. At this stage, you have deep technical knowledge. You're highly respected within your own field. You can solve complex problems, but you communicate primarily with other experts, people who share your vocabulary and your technical frame of reference. Your influence is limited to those who already speak your language.
Stage 2 is what we could call the translator stage. At this stage, you've started developing the communication skills we've discussed today. You can explain your expertise in simple terms. You can use analogies. You can lead with outcomes. You can adapt your language to your audience. Now your influence starts to expand. You can work effectively with non-technical stakeholders. You can present to leadership. You can collaborate with people from different functions and disciplines.
Stage 3 is what we could call the visionary leader stage. At this stage, simple, clear communication has become your default mode. You don't just explain technical concepts clearly. You use that clarity to paint a picture of the future, to inspire people to act, to align diverse groups around a shared vision, to build trust across organizational boundaries. Your communication creates movement, it drives change, it shapes strategy.
And the transition from stage 1 to stage 3 is essentially the journey of learning to communicate complex ideas simply. It's the journey we've been describing throughout this entire video.
And what we find so exciting is that this journey is available to everyone. It doesn't matter what your technical field is. It doesn't matter where you're starting from with your English skills. It doesn't matter whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, a confident public speaker, or someone who gets nervous in meetings. These are learnable skills. These are practicable habits, and they compound over time.
The more consistently you practice leading with outcomes, using simple vocabulary, building analogies, structuring your message clearly, the more natural it becomes. And the more natural it becomes, the more effective you are. And the more effective you are, the more people listen to you, trust you, follow your lead, and seek out your perspective.
That is the global authority strategy. It's not about speaking the most eloquently, it's not about having the most impressive vocabulary, it's not about knowing more than everyone else in the room. It's about translating what you know into a form that creates understanding, alignment, and action in every person you communicate with, regardless of their background, their level of expertise, or their first language.
And if you'd like even more English listening and speaking practice, be sure to check out our podcast playlist right here on this channel. You'll find so many useful lessons designed to help you improve your English naturally and practically, just like what we've been doing today. The link is in the description below.
All right, let's shift into our conclusion, because we want to leave you with something that ties all of this together in a way that you'll remember and be able to use.
We've covered a lot of ground today, a lot of really important, practical, immediately applicable ground. And we want to take a few minutes to tie the threads together to make sure that when you leave this video, you have a clear, coherent picture of everything we've shared.
Let's do a quick journey through everything we explored together. We started by talking about the problem with smart talk. We talked about how industry jargon, technical language, and complex vocabulary create barriers instead of connections. We introduced the concept of cognitive load theory and explained why complex words make listeners tune out, especially in high-stakes situations. And we talked about the exciting 2026 shift in professional culture, where clarity is increasingly recognized as the ultimate sign of mastery.
Then we explored the power of high-frequency vocabulary. We talked about the difference between Germanic and Latinate words in English and why the shorter, more common Germanic words are almost always more effective in professional communication. We did a real-world translation exercise, turning jargon-filled corporate language into clear, direct, impactful communication. And we talked about how using simple vocabulary reduces the risk of being misunderstood in diverse, global professional environments.
After that, we dug into the art of building relatable mental models. We talked about the thing explainer approach and what it teaches us about the power of simplicity. We explored how to choose analogies based on universal human experiences, including cooking, travel, home building, and the human body. We explained complex technologies like machine learning, blockchain, and quantum computing using accessible everyday comparisons. And we made the important point that a good enough analogy is always more effective than a technically perfect but confusing explanation.
Then we talked about strategic structure for maximum retention. We introduced the inverted pyramid approach, leading with the outcome rather than the process. We discussed the dramatic impact of active voice and short sentences on clarity, confidence, and comprehension. And we explored the one concept per slide rule and the power of message headlines in presentations.
And finally, we mapped out the global authority strategy. We talked about how to communicate effectively with non-technical executives by speaking their language of outcomes, costs, risks, and timelines. We discussed the specific practices that make communication more effective in multicultural, international settings. We gave you the 10-question complexity audit checklist, and we described the transformational journey from technical expert to visionary leader.
Now, that's a lot. That is genuinely a lot of material, and you don't need to implement all of it at once. In fact, we'd encourage you not to try. Trying to change everything about your communication style at once is overwhelming and unsustainable.
Instead, we have a simple recommendation. Pick one thing, just one. Choose the idea from today's video that resonated most strongly with you, the one that you feel most ready to experiment with, and focus on that one thing for the next week.
Maybe it's trying the inverted pyramid in your next presentation. Maybe it's doing a vocabulary audit on your next email. Maybe it's coming up with one analogy to explain a concept you talk about regularly. Maybe it's practicing using active voice in your writing. Pick one, do it consistently for a week, and then notice the difference.
Because here's what we know from everything we've shared today. Small, consistent improvements in communication have a compounding effect over time. Each step toward clearer communication makes the next step easier. And each small improvement in how people understand you builds your reputation, your influence, and your impact.
And perhaps most importantly, remember this. The goal is not to dumb things down. The goal is to lift people up. When you communicate simply and clearly, you're not lowering the level of the conversation. You're making it possible for more people to participate in it. You're removing the barriers that keep smart, talented people from contributing their ideas. You're creating an environment where the best thinking can surface, not the most complex-sounding thinking.
That is a profound act of leadership. That is a genuine service to your team, your organization, and everyone you work with.
Now, we want to take a moment to really encourage you, because we know that changing your communication habits takes courage. It takes the willingness to put yourself out there, to try something new, to possibly feel a little awkward at first.
Going back to our opening, remember what we talked about at the very beginning of this video? The fear that comes with high-stakes communication, the heart racing, the throat tightening, the terror of not being understood or not being taken seriously?
Here's what we want you to hold on to. Every single great communicator you've ever admired, every brilliant speaker, every inspiring leader, every persuasive presenter, they all started somewhere. They all had to learn these skills. They all had moments of uncertainty and imperfection.
And you know what? Your imperfections are not your weakness. Your mistakes are not your failures. They are your data. They are your feedback. They are the raw material of your growth.
Every time you try a new communication approach and it doesn't quite land the way you hoped, you learn something. Every time you reach for a simple word instead of a complex one and it works beautifully, you build a little more confidence. Every time you lead with the outcome and watch the room light up with understanding, you add another brick to the foundation of your authority as a communicator.
This is a journey, and you are already on it. The fact that you're here, watching this video, thinking carefully about how to communicate more effectively means you've already taken the first step, and that first step is everything.
So please, don't let perfectionism hold you back. Don't wait until you feel completely ready or completely confident before you start trying these things. Try them now. Try them imperfectly. Learn from what happens, and keep going.
Because the world genuinely needs people who can bridge the gap between the complex and the accessible, between the technical and the human, between knowing something and sharing it in a way that creates change. The world needs more people who can take the most complicated ideas and make them simple enough for everyone to understand and act on.
And you can be one of those people. In fact, you already are. Because you're here, you're learning, and you're growing.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us today. It genuinely means a great deal to both of us to be able to share these ideas with you.
And if you found value in today's lesson, if you're walking away with even one idea that you're excited to try, please take 5 seconds right now to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps us reach more English learners who need this content, and it means everything to us to know that our work is making a difference.
Also, we would absolutely love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us, which section resonated most with you today? Is there a concept from your own professional field that you're going to try explaining with an analogy? Or maybe you've already been practicing some of these principles and you've seen results. Share your story, share your questions. We read every single comment, and we genuinely love engaging with our community.
And don't forget, if you want even more practical English communication practice, our podcast playlist is right here on the channel. It's filled with lessons like this one, designed to help you build your English naturally, practically, and enjoyably. We'll put the link in the description so you can find it easily.
From both of us, thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to growing as a communicator. We believe in you completely, and we can't wait to see how you use these ideas to create more clarity, more connection, and more impact in everything you do.
Keep it simple, keep it clear, and keep growing.
Until next time, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye, everyone.
Bye!